And one day, someone in the U.S. government didn't like what I was saying in the Washington Post. Did an interview with me. But most of all, it pisses me off is that they lie, and they lie. And even worse, as I said, if you speak the truth, then they go after you.
Do you feel that Russian media gives you more freedom to say what you want to say?
Yeah, Russian media, much more freedom. They said, John, what are American journalists saying? That was the question. John, what are American journalists saying? And I'm saying, wait. I have to correct you. There are no more American journalists. I'm sorry. They're all propagandists. They've been given tasks to spread disinformation, to spread false narratives. Call them what you want. The foreign policy elite, the deep state, call them what you want. But their goal has been and remains to destroy the Russian Federation.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Stan and welcome to A Russian Opinion. Today we have John Varoli, who is an American journalist and he's living here in Moscow, Russia. And today he's going to be telling us his story. Thank you for joining us. Subscribe, like, comment. You know what to do. John, welcome to the channel and thank you very much for accepting this interview.
Yeah, no, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Could you give a very brief introduction of who you are, where you're from, and why you're in Moscow?
Yeah, so my family were from New York, and my family's lived there for 100 years. I grew up in a very patriotic family of, my father served the federal government for over 40 years. He was stationed at the embassy in Brussels during the Cold War. So we were, I like to say we were on the front lines of the Cold War, and that's where I got my first taste of, my first contact with the Soviet Union at the time. Because we were constantly under surveillance and as part of the American mission there. For me, that was very exciting because I was a teenager. So I went on to study Soviet studies. And I was the last group of young students to graduate Cornell University in Soviet Studies, class of 1990. Fast forward just in real brief, I became a journalist, moved to Russia in June 1992. I became a journalist. I worked 15 years for major media. So I worked for the New York Times, I worked for Bloomberg, I worked for Reuters in the course of 15 years. But altogether, I lived in Russia for 20 years at the time. Left Russia in January 2013, right? So just over 20 years. Started my own PR agency, an international PR agency, did quite well for a while until the sanctions began on Russia, which obviously was 2014. And then, let's see, my situation became even more difficult when in 2019, Uncle Sam decided to go after me because I was giving independent, neutral, objective analysis of the situation in Ukraine for major Russian TV channels. So I was in this period, if you can imagine, 2018, 2019, I'm just simply an on-air commentator for these major Russian channels. And I could talk about it more in detail, but real quick. But then one day, someone in the U.S. government didn't like what I was saying in the Washington Post, did an interview with me and did an article. And the article, you can find the article, just search under Washington Post, John Varoli, and the article insinuates that I'm a Russian agent simply because I was giving independent, objective, neutral analysis about the situation in Ukraine. And of course, the U.S. government doesn't like independent, objective, neutral analysis of the situation anywhere in the world. And the U.S. government, unfortunately, does not like intellectual integrity at all. And so I decided to, then we had COVID, real quick, COVID. Then the special military operation began in early 2022, and that's when I decided that's it. I'm not gonna play it safe anymore. I'm just gonna get up and tell the truth. I mean, more than ever, tell the truth. More than ever, this is what's important. And I made that fateful decision in March 2022. I said, you know what? I support the people of Donbass, and I was very careful. I said I support the people of Donbass in their right for self-determination, in their right for freedom. The USA began. How the USA began? It began in the same manner. We seceded from the British Empire and created our own country. And Donbass has basically done the same thing. And I support the underdog. I support the people of Donbass. And of course, you can imagine the firestorm that's ignited after that.
Of course. You can imagine that. And I think when the Americans were seceding from Great Britain at the time, I think the Queen had asked the Russian Tsar for help, and I think we declined, and we actually supported the U.S. from my brief understanding of American history. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, the Russian government at the time, the imperial government, never actively helped the U.S., but the fact that she said, no, we will not send Russian troops, Cossacks, we will not send them to the New World, that played a crucial.
Oh, was it Catherine the Great?
Catherine the Great.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, had Catherine the Great agreed to this request, there would have been thousands of Russian troops, Cossacks, in fighting on behalf of Great Britain in the American War of Independence, which of course would have turned the tide in favor of Great Britain. So in that sense, her decision to say no was actually fateful.
It can be considered as either staying neutral or being supportive.
Yep.
Well, kind of a funny, stupid question. Are you a Russian agent? Do you consider yourself to be one?
I'm not. I'm father of 3 Russian children. That's what I am. I'm father of 3 Russian children with a Russian wife. And yeah, you know what? And I'm not embarrassed to say, I support Russia. I support Russia because Russia's on the side of truth, of justice, and most important, truth. That's what, if anything that really pisses me off, if I could use that word.
Yeah, sure.
It's the fact that our government, again, I grew up in a very patriotic government family, and my relatives today who still serve the U.S. government. But most of all, what pisses me off is that they lie, they lie, they lie, and they lie. And even worse, as I said, if you say to speak the truth, then they go after you. Because I've always said, you know what? Okay, how about this? You can have your opinion, I have mine, but let's have a free and open discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Free and open discussions are something that I actually welcome. And it's funny because sometimes it happens where people will come in, they'll start saying something, and then you comment back and they're like, wait, am I not free to say? You are, of course, but you're also free to be challenged on your ideas. And that's something that I really actually enjoy. But so you worked for Bloomberg, for New York Times, for Reuters. And my question is rather simple, but I'm trying to get a better understanding of you. Do you consider yourself to be conservative, democratic, liberal, Republican? Where neutral, perhaps?
I will say I'm neutral in my views, personal views on a wide range of issues. They are quite eclectic. But I would say this, my trajectory has been from very conservative as a young man to more and more towards the left. Usually it's the other way around. Usually people start on the left and move to the right. So my trajectory is a little bit the opposite, actually quite the opposite. And I'm getting to the point where this morning, someone asked me, John, are you a socialist? And I thought about that and said, first of all, I don't like labels. But how about this? I like the Russian system. This notion, the Russian government has this notion that, we are the government, we have power to take care of the people, our people, the people of the Russian Federation. That's how it should be. That's how government should be. And I like the fact that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that healthcare, at least, right, is free of charge in Russia. Education is most of it. I mean, if you want to pay for extra care, I think you have that right, or for education or healthcare. But I understand that there's a basic free healthcare system and education system. Am I correct?
The good thing is there's a choice. So, for example, I could have taken and put my daughter in a private kindergarten and then a private school, but I had a choice of taking her and putting her in a government kindergarten, which was, I think, $30 US per month. They had a swimming pool. They had all kinds of different lessons, drawing, sports activities. They didn't sleep on the floor in little tiny mats. They had their own beds. There was a kitchen, a nurse's office. I understand that not everywhere in Russia these kinds of modern-ish type of kindergartens exist. Not everywhere. It would be great if they did. But what I like about Russia is that there is a choice. The same thing with healthcare. I can open up my app and plug in a few credentials and then actually have an appointment somewhere in a government hospital or clinic. Or I can just go downstairs. I have like a choice of 3 clinics around me. If I don't feel like wasting a lot of time, I can just go and get everything done there, and it's not even that expensive. I like having the choice because in the US, you don't have a lot of choice. And in Canada, the opposite, you don't have a lot of choice either. But because the system is fully government there, paid for by the taxpayers, just like here. However, there, the waits for operations, the waits for just seeing somebody are enormous, tremendous. Weeks, months, sometimes years. Something that thankfully many people in Russia just don't experience, although there are some, unfortunately. So you're right, 100%. The fact that there's a choice is what matters to me.
Okay.
You worked in those particular news agencies. From my very limited knowledge is that they're very left-leaning and liberal. So if you started off as a conservative, how is the conservative voice? Is it freely listened to in those media stations or news outlets? Are conservatives allowed to voice their opinion or no?
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. And you might say I got my lucky break to begin working at the New York Times. It was in at the end of 1997. And the reason why they hired me, because I was in St. Petersburg and they needed someone in St. Petersburg. And the one woman at the office in Moscow, she knew me and she knew that I know Russia well. I speak Russian. So they offered me this position to be their person, their correspondent in St. Petersburg. So I did that. And then Bloomberg knew me as well. So I was invited to work with these major media because I was a Russia area specialist and there was not many people to choose from. This is the problem. This is the problem with a lot of Western correspondents. They're not experts in Russia. I am. I was trained as one. So that's the big difference. So I was lucky to get in. But I realized, like you said, a lot of my left-leaning colleagues, so I was just a little bit, basically, okay, I'm going to keep it mum, because I would imagine, I'm like 30 years old, I'm junior, I want to rise up in the ranks, I want to be successful. So I said, listen, I'm not going to get into discussions with anybody. I'm just going to do my job and kind of keep quiet, keep a low profile, right? That's how I was able to work there for a while, at least for 15 years.
So would you say that there is freedom of speech in these media outlets in the States, or there is no freedom of speech?
Oh, today.
Is it just like Russia, for example, or is it the opposite? Do you feel that Russian media gives you more freedom to say what you want to say?
Yeah, Russian media, much more freedom. So let me, whereas in the Western media, and I said this morning, I was talking on I was on a Russian talk show this morning, and they said, John, what are American journalists saying? That was the question. John, what are American journalists saying? And I'm saying, wait. I have to correct you. There are no more American journalists. I'm sorry. They're all propagandists. They've been given tasks to spread disinformation, to spread false narratives. I said, I'm sorry. I'm going to be very harsh about this. There are no longer American journalists. They are paid propagandists. They're behaving very dishonestly, and they know it. And there's a lot of censorship and control in the Western media. Whereas I'm invited to speak in the Russian media, I'm often invited to talk shows, and we have absolute freedom of speech. And I am actually so amazed at the wide range of opinions. When I'm on these talk shows, you have an incredibly wide range of opinions, which you don't have in the US. In the US, that's it. You are told Russia's bad, Iran is bad, and that you cannot, in the major media, and you cannot deviate from that line. There is total control of the major media, is totally under the control of, who, of the White House, of the Pentagon, and the Secret Services. That's the way it is.
What is the end goal of portraying Russians and Russia as this bad orc state with backwards living and poor economy? And what's the end goal?
Okay, I'll just go straight to it. Yeah, okay. The goal is to destroy and break up the Russian Federation. And this is not a goal that was dreamt up just a few years ago. No, I remember in the 1990s when I was a junior correspondent at the New York Times, there was like a chatter going around in the circles of American correspondents that was moving in, and other people, because especially when I was living in St. Petersburg, I was often meeting a lot of important Americans, powerful, influential Americans who would come over to St. Petersburg, and I would greet them and meet them, or they'd talk to me. And the chatter in the late 90s, this is before Putin became prime minister, was that the Russian Federation is going to fall apart. Just like the Soviet Union fell apart, the Russian Federation is going to fall apart. Get ready, be prepared. And I'm like, I'm barely 30 years old at that point, and I'm thinking to myself, like, why would we want that? Like, how does it serve our interests? That'd be horrible. That'd be a disaster. The Soviet Union collapsing has created so many problems. And what I didn't realize is that there are people in Washington, perhaps a small number of people, perhaps a few hundred, perhaps a few thousand, call them what you want, the foreign policy elite, the deep state, call them what you want, but their goal has been and remains to destroy the Russian Federation, to break it up. I mean, in some cases, they say it openly. They say it, right? So there are officials in America, in Europe, who say it openly. We want to destroy the Russian Federation. We want to break it up into 12 or 15 new countries, and then we will dominate those countries. That's the end goal.
Of course, it'll be easier to control, easier to get resources. So I completely agree with you on that. But, the question that I have is, how is it that, and I'm not sure if people in the West fully believe this narrative, but how can they fathom that Russia is a weak economy that's falling apart and at the same time is super dangerous and is going to attack us yesterday? How come there is that narrative that is completely contradictory?
That is like one of the $1 million questions that, we ourselves as experts, we grapple, we struggle with this question. Like, why is the West putting out these two conflicting narratives? Well, it speaks about really this type of schizophrenia.
Mm.
The schizophrenia in the Western elites mindset. Because yes, it's a schizophrenia where really they are afraid of Russia, because Russia is powerful, because they do know it's powerful. But at the same time, they've wedded themselves to this idea that Russia is weak. And listen, if we just push a little bit more, some more sanctions, and we keep those Ukrainians fighting against Russia, keep the pressure on, and we're going to take Russia down. So it is really a psychological problem that these people have. And I don't want to sound like I'm being nasty or critical or harsh here, but the people in power in Western capitals, these are very sick people. We have to start to accept that. These are very sick people, psychologically sick. These are people who might be using drugs for not just years, maybe for decades they've been using drugs. So we have to start to understand the physical aspects the aspects of their physical and mental impairment. I mean, as someone who I follow the Western elite, leaders every day, I watch their speeches, I watch their appearances, and you really begin to realize that these are people who do have severe cognitive and physical problems. And I think we as experts, we tend to underestimate how that could it impairs their ability to properly understand events. It impairs their ability to properly understand Russian intentions and Russian motives. So myself, as someone who is healthy, I've never used drugs in my life, I know how to deal with people, I know the Russian mentality, I have no problem dealing with Russians. If the US, how about this? If the US was sincere about getting along with Russia, excuse me for the immodesty, but make me ambassador. And I could solve things very, very quickly to the mutual benefit of both countries. But we have an elite that doesn't want to get along. We have an elite, like I said, that suffers from severe psychological issues. That's the problem.
People, we can be friends. I have many friends in the States. You have many friends in Russia. We can be friends. But on the government level, on the country level, do you think it's possible that sometime in the future our governments can be friends? And if yes, then how? If no, then why?
I think no, because the American elite, they've crossed the Rubicon. They've gone too far this time. Okay, so let me give you a comparison. During the Cold War, what's called the First Cold War, there were powerful groups in Washington, actually mostly on the liberal left side, that wanted to get along with Moscow because the liberal leftists in the 70s and 80s, they saw kindred spirit in Moscow, the Soviet Union, the socialist system of the Soviet Union. So they wanted to get along with Moscow. So there was a powerful force, right, in Washington at that time. Today, there's absolutely no serious group of people, powerful people, neither in the private sector, neither in the government, anywhere that wants to get along. I don't see anyone who wants to get along. There's a few congresswomen, 2 or 3 congresswomen, 2 or 3 senators. That's not a political force. No, they're just individuals. This is the problem. And like I said, the U.S. has crossed the Rubicon. I want to expand on that. The problem is that during the Cold War, there was this unwritten agreement that we, the Soviet Union, the U.S., we can have proxy wars in Africa, in South America. But you know what? Europe, keep it calm, keep it peaceful. No conflict in Europe. Even when there were some nasty things happening in Europe, both sides showed restraint. And of course, now, with the desire of NATO to conquer, and I want to say the desire of NATO to conquer Ukraine, to absorb it, that is obviously extremely aggressive. And this is what people have to understand in America. NATO's effort to absorb and control and literally conquer Ukraine is a most extreme form of aggression. People have to understand that because it threatens the security of the Russian Federation. People who don't understand geopolitics, this is the problem. People don't understand geopolitics. Between powerful entities, powerful geopolitical players, there must be a buffer zone. This is geopolitics 101. There needs to be a buffer zone. It was a mistake to accept the Baltic states. It was into NATO. It's a huge mistake to try to absorb and take over, conquer Ukraine.
Why do you think that right now there's such a very powerful push, at least from the American side, to sign a peace deal now? And why do you think that Europe is really dragging its feet and are making sure that there's no way Russia would accept a peace deal?
The Pentagon, Washington, London, Berlin, they're panicking. The Russians are winning. It's clear. The Russian forces are moving forward. They're moving forward pretty rapidly now. At this rate, they're going to liberate, we have to be very clear, liberate all the territory that democratically voted to join the Russian Federation. We're talking about the Zaporozhye region, Donbass region. So these regions will soon be liberated. So the West is trying to stop that, obviously. So they're like, oh, let's have peace. Let's have peace now, please. Let's have peace. So they're trying to stop that. They're trying to get a ceasefire. Oh, let's have a ceasefire now because they want to stop the Russian advance. That's one of their main goals. But of course, they don't really want peace. They want to buy time. That's their ultimate goal. They want to buy time for the NATO proxy forces, so-called Ukraine, the NATO proxy force. They want to buy time for them. So, get a breather in there, get a ceasefire, get a breather for 3 or 4 years, and then they'll resume the war against Russia in, say, 3 or 4 years. And I think this time, we've seen it before. They've done it before. They've lied before with the Minsk I, Minsk II accords. And this time, the Kremlin is not going to fall for it. They're much wiser. But I want to say it's very important. I don't see a split between Europe and America, because who's controlling foreign policy in the White House? It's Rubio, it's Hegseth, right? It's Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent, the man of Soros. So we have the left oligarchs are represented by Bessent in the White House, and the right oligarchs are represented by Rubio and Hegseth. And they're the ones dealing with Europe, not President Trump. He's the figurehead. We all know that. He's just the figurehead. So the Europeans and the White House, they've agreed. They've agreed to everything long ago. In this sort of disagreement that we're seeing, it's just theater. It's simply theater.
You know where we're losing? On Facebook, in the media, apparently. Because I go into Western media, I go on Facebook and I'm like, Russia's losing this, Russia's losing that. And I'm scratching my head thinking, okay, well, this is another two-headed narrative, because at the same time, we want to sign the peace deal. So I agree with you that this push for peace now is because the front line is not what is, how it's portrayed in Western media. It's moving west. What would happen to you if you went back home to the US? I mean, you have friends and family who are, tied with the government, I guess you could say. But at the same time, they don't really like you based on what you say. So what do you feel that would happen to you?
I'm fearful. I'm fearful. Anything can happen. We see that the U.S. government is willing to do anything, horrible things to people who disagree with it. They're afraid because they're afraid of the truth. They're afraid of facts. They're afraid of free discussion. They can't have a free discussion. That's why they have censorship. That's why we have to understand, in the U.S., when it comes to certain issues, I mean, if you want to talk about healthcare and education, okay, there's freedom of the press, freedom of speech on those minor issues. Well, not minor, they're important, but domestic issues. But when it comes to foreign policy, military policy, there's almost no freedom in America. There is a strict control, a lot of censorship, and a lot of repression. And everybody who says things like I'm saying, the truth about the situation with Russia, anytime you speak the truth, they get very angry and they're going to go after you. Also, I just want to make one point, which I forgot. People have to remember that we know about to what extent is Russia really weak or not weak. Let's not forget, Russia is fighting alone against a coalition of about 54 countries. 30 NATO countries, plus Japan, South Korea, Pakistan. I'm talking about the countries that are sending weapons. Even Azerbaijan is sending weapons. 54 countries are sending some form of support to the Ukrainian regime. And Russia alone. And Russia is defeating them. So that gives you an idea of just how powerful Russia is and how powerful the Russian armed forces are.
Do you think that we're seeing the end of the American empire, or do you think this is all just fake news and the American empire can continue living for many hundreds of years to come?
No, this American empire, it's still strong, it's still robust, it's going forward. But I think, and especially when the Ukrainian regime is defeated, and it will be defeated and probably defeated soon, when it collapses, it's going to bring down the European Union. Oh yeah, it's going to bring down the European Union. People have to realize that. So let's imagine this: the European Union goes down. That's obviously going to affect NATO, and then that's obviously going to affect the United States. So when the European Union collapses, is it going to ignite a major economic and financial crisis throughout the entire Western world? Actually, it could. And then obviously that would negatively impact the USA. But still, the USA, we have to understand, it is a powerful country, and it's a very well-built system. This federal system that the United States has is obviously extremely strong and extremely robust. But so again, Europe is probably in for some really bad times, 2 or 3 decades for certain, but the United States will remain strong.
And I agree with you that Europe is going to be facing a choice because, as we know, there are satellite countries. There are spheres of influence. And if Russia puts Europe in such a uncomfortable zone where they have to choose between going west or going east, then for sure there's already apparently various different, as we call unfriendly nations, were trying to make some kind of contract, some kind of deal on the side. They're already feeling out what they can do back on the Russian market. So it'll be interesting to see, obviously, what the result is going to be. But you know what, John? In almost all of my interviews, I have something called the open mic. So the open mic is a time when you can say whatever you want. I have no control of what you're saying. There's no censorship in this case. It could be something like a topic that we didn't touch. It could be, you can say hello to somebody, perhaps. Your open mic, your words, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I want to address the American people and all the people in the West and the global community. It's really important that we take a stand. We take a stand for truth. Take a stand for truth, justice, and peace. And we have to understand that there's no longer really two sides to the story. It's very clear-cut. I mean, in Kiev, we're talking about a brutal, totalitarian terrorist regime. And I don't say that lightly, because I translated 2 reports of the Russian Federation about war crimes, about Ukrainian war crimes in the Kursk region and Ukrainian war crimes in the city of Korakova. And you can imagine what I had to translate this, probably altogether 60 pages. It was testimonies of witnesses who survived these massacres. So to give you an idea, the Ukrainian forces, well, let's call them NATO proxy forces, that's what they are. They slaughtered maybe 2,000 civilians, cold-bloodedly murdered 2,000 civilians. We're talking a terrorist attack on the level of 9/11. And Americans have to understand that Americans paid for that terrorism. They paid for those massacres. And we should not accept that. We have to bring all our senators and congressmen, anyone who supports Ukraine, they have to be brought to justice. They have to be held accountable for supporting for that terrorism and those massacres.
John, thank you very much. We only had a very brief moment to speak, unfortunately, because we're going to be at an event soon. Normally, these interviews do take a lot longer and we can have a more in-depth conversation. And maybe in the future we can have something like this. But otherwise, thank you very much for taking the time to have a very, very brief yet interesting interview with me.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.